Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we share insights about the future of agriculture. Each week, we dive into the stories, technology, and ideas shaping a sustainable and profitable future for farms and rural communities alike. I'm Paul Windemuller, host of the AgCulture Podcast, and today we have a guest that many of you have probably heard before. She's been on a few times now, a friend of mine that I met through the Nuffield Scholars program, Sophie Gregory. Now, Sophie's been on her year-long journey with Nuffield, traveling around the world, studying about organic farming. I know I don't talk a lot about organics on this podcast, so I thought it'd be good for her to share that perspective of the industry. Some of the things that she learned in several interesting areas around the world, especially in Asia. She spent a bit of time there, and I think those insights were particularly interesting for me. And just wanted to have her be able to share her stories. She's speaking around the world at many different events on the topic of dairy farming, organically, and just organics in general. So I think this should be a pretty insightful episode. So I hope you enjoy hearing from Sophie Gregory. Sophie, welcome back to the AgCulture Podcast. I think you're the first person to be on, your third episode that you've appeared in, right? Right.
Yeah.
So welcome back. It's been just over a year. Actually, I think it was this week that we left Brazil, right?
I think you're right.
This week.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. And you first appeared on the podcast in January of last year, talking about your story, your and Tom's story of your dairy and your journey is starting in the industry young and running a farm and taking over a farm and now owning a farm. But you've been on a Nuffield journey. We've kind of crossed paths. You've been at my place. I spent a few days at your place. It was great to see your family and your farm. And you've done a lot in the last 12 months. So let's start with some of the journeys that you've taken on your topic. In you want to give us your topic, Nuffield topic that you've been studying?
Yeah, of course, Paul. Yeah, it was so nice to come and visit you and meet your family and put everything into context as well.
Yeah.
Especially as we've all been on this mad journey together. It's just really nice to see like the backstory of everyone and why they've ended up doing a scholarship, because everyone has a reason really underneath it all. My topic was what's the future for organic dairy? And the reason I chose that was because at the time our milk price was really struggling and our feed price was quite high and a lot of people were getting out of the sector. So we were actually wondering this ourselves, whether we should leave organic too. We saw it as like a prolonged period of low price. So it wasn't just a normal dip. It was like a prolonged dip that was really costing us financially. So we were sort of questioning every bit about it. So that's what led to my topic, really.
So over the last 12 months, where have you been to dig into your topic?
Well, I think probably I've really taken the mickey with my travel, probably. I think I treated Nuffield really as a chance to see a bit of the world as well, because I think I'd had children very young, and so I didn't really get that sort of travelling period of my life. So I very much, and I was very lucky to be supported in that I really went for it with the travel, and I wanted to go places that I wouldn't go normally. So I did quite a bit of Europe. So I did Hungary, Austria, Italy, France, and then Ireland as well. And then I've been in Azerbaijan, not somewhere I would have ever gone. Sri Lanka, Taiwan, Indonesia, Australia, and Tasmania. It's part of Australia, and then I did America for 3 weeks in the summer as well. Yeah. Yep. So I've probably missed some off, but yeah, those are the ones that are stuck on my mind.
Okay. And along with all of the travel, you've taken on some other roles or have gotten more in depth in some roles and had some opportunities this year as well outside of the farm. What did that look like?
I sort of had gone from really full time on the farm, sort of feeding calves at like 7 at night, that kind of like really double milkings a day. So I think what I wanted to do with Nuffield was take every opportunity that I got, and it does create a lot of opportunities within that year. And I think there is an expectation that when you're doing a Nuffield that you feed the information you're learning back. I think that's a big part of it. And I think that's probably, some people see that within their year, depending on how relevant their topic is that at that time, or some people end up doing things afterwards and, in the years to come afterwards. So, no, I had some amazing opportunities. I was already part of the board of representatives for our milk buyer, Arla, which is a European cooperative. So I was very lucky that opened a lot of doors to have conversations that I probably wouldn't have had with some of the leadership there. And a highlight recently was talking to Peder, who is our CEO. He's been CEO. He was actually the youngest CEO of Arla ever. And he's been in position for a long time, 20 years plus, and he's seen everything within the business. So that was a huge opportunity. And I had a good couple of hours with him, which was great. And other things I've done, I joined the National Dairy Board, which basically is our union, which supports and helps with all the information going into policy, and also represents farmers. People subscribe to be part of NFU, and we then use that money to direct policy, but also make sure we're looking at the fair dealings of the industry, represent anything that a member is worried about. And then within Arla, we've got an organic committee, which is great, which we then feed information back. So the sellers understand, within the sales team, understand actually the true cost of organic, all of those things. And then just some amazing opportunities to do some shouting about dairy, which is, the thing I love most. So everything from speaking at COP through to, which is the climate conference. And that was why I was in Azerbaijan. And then to Nourish, which is where all the CEOs of the big dairy companies meet. They rotate it around the world. So I had the opportunity to sit on a panel at that and represent farmers, which is super important because it's stopping the detachment between the CEO and the farmer was really important to me. And that's why a lot of the things I've said yes to, that's been the prime reason for. Lots of different industry things which have really helped my Nuffield too. And I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've had.
In your Nuffield experience so far, you've done the travel and study on your topic, and then you've taken on a lot of these industry roles, opportunities, and opportunities to speak. Where did you get the most insight from? Was it through the travel, or was it really through some of these opportunities that you had, open doors that you had, that you might not have saw at the beginning of your Nuffield journey?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Paul. I think the whole Nuffield has been about the people that I've met. And so whether that is a farmer on the ground in Indonesia hand delivering their milk to, the conversation with Peder, I have learned things from both. I think without each other, they didn't open the opportunities. I was very lucky that the industry roles and the Nuffield complemented each other at the right time. It came at the right time. But I think we talk a bit about luck. And sometimes I think you make your own luck by positioning yourself in the right place at the right time. And if you're passionate and enthusiastic about something, it's hard for people to say no. So it's all been about the people that I've met. So we can go into Indonesia in a bit, but a lot of it was the resilience within the people that I met that really opened the stories up to sort of coming back to the topic title and whether I actually saw a future within organic dairy.
So speaking of your trip to Indonesia and learning about organics, talk to us a little bit about what you learned. I know you were really excited to go to Southeast Asia and that neck of the woods in the world to learn from some of the things that had happened there previously and what's going on there today. So you want to start out talking about that?
Yeah, of course. So the best way to talk about it, I think, Paul, is to talk about the comparison between the two. So I did Sri Lanka and Indonesia. And Sri Lanka, the reason I went there was because originally Sri Lanka, it had a government policy where it forced farmers into organic overnight, but it wasn't organic as such. It was it removed chemical fertilizer, so it wasn't going saying everyone has to organically farm. It was actually we're going to take away the fertilizer, which we have been subsidising for a long time. And the thing with organic is that it's actually, you need to learn to farm in a different way. You can't switch the soil overnight. It's a whole different mindset. So rightly or wrongly, organic was blamed for, it caused huge corruption within the country where, fertilizer was, being priced out for farmers that couldn't afford it. It was been banned. And starvation, crops were not surviving. No one knew how to grow things without the fertilizer. And it they reverted the policy within 9 months and went back to using nitrogen. But the comparison between that type of farming there, so I saw everything from tea plantations to mangoes to rice paddies and then some dairies. So what I saw in terms of dairy in Sri Lanka, they don't actually have their own organic certification for dairy over there. Or they did the only organic certification they had was for tea, and there wasn't it wasn't a market, and there wasn't the supply. But a lot of small-scale farmers, there were 2 big dairies over there, very impressive American-style, sort of 3 times a day dairies, but they were owned externally. And the really interesting thing about Sri Lanka is that I think it's 80% of land is owned by the government, so it's still very colonialised. Yep. So it's quite difficult to upscale, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the dairies there were very small. And from what I saw, I went to one dairy which was owned by a private company, and they had 200 cubicles there ready to go with a very nice parlour, but only 20 milking cows because they were really struggling to A, source animals, and B, get calves to a lactating age. So it was like the potential there was so huge, and actually it's something that I know I'll end up looking at further in life, because they have huge ability to grow forage there. It rains most of the year. It is quite humid, but you can adapt farming around that. We've seen dairy farming done very well in humid countries. But if you compare that to where I went into Indonesia, which was part of a project that our milk buyer had set up to sort of bring knowledge within the country. So things like genetics and animal welfare and sort of raising the standard of dairying there. You'd see in Sri Lanka sort of a cow doing 8, that was a good cow, doing 8 litres a day, being milked twice a day, through to farmers in Indonesia doing sort of 21, 22 litres a day, and very similar climates. But the big difference was the genetics that had been brought in, but also the knowledge exchange. And that's where I really saw, it really brought me to tears, because I saw organic not just as like a market and people buying a premium product. I saw it as a tool to raise standards. So they were just using the organic standards to raise the animal welfare because they didn't have any standards.
So there was no organic standards there?
No, but this was in Indonesia. ALA were bringing in these organic standards, which were raising the welfare of these animals and producing more milk, which meant that a family, 3 generations could live off 3 cows, which, and that was a huge difference to Sri Lanka, where it was really hard work, and they didn't have the knowledge coming into the country. And I think it just highlighted to me that it is not just about organic, it's about it's the knowledge exchange, and also having some sort of welfare standard that the country hadn't had before, if that makes sense. So we sort of take it for granted, or I say take it for granted, I'm not sure we always feel like that, but the standards that are put upon us within the UK and within America, it does it is actually good for production of the animals, if that makes sense, for the milk production. And I just saw the contrast between Sri Lanka and Indonesia huge, and that was massively through knowledge exchange and and external businesses bringing genetics and things within the country.
So were the structure of the farms in Indonesia and Sri Lanka similar in most cases? It was just the management practices that had accelerated the production levels that Indonesia experienced?
Yeah, I think I didn't get to see too many of the small farms in Sri Lanka, but I saw the animal. I went to a demo farm, and I went to a demo farm in Indonesia as well, and very similar climates, very similar facilities as such, as in some people either hand milking or moving a milking machine between animals, if that makes sense. So I think that, the huge thing was the genetics, definitely the potential for, milk production from improved genetics. And that's the right cow for the system. And also just how to look after an animal. Times had moved, it was like stepping back in time.
Yep.
Times have moved so much further. And actually that's what really was highlighted in Indonesia, how much further in front they were.
And mostly because of that knowledge transfer from other producers that had come in and said, this is how we've done it and found success, and just using successful principles.
Exactly, and I think the project that's been set up within there, some of it's to support access to market, and that's a lot of what happens within these developing countries.
Yeah.
But what comes with that is that it brings huge benefits to the local community. I went to this milk collection centre, which had a bulk milk tank, which is where we store our milk at home. And that was collecting sort of 100 farms worth of milk, and they were transporting that after every milking, so morning and night, on their mopeds in little churns. And that was how it was, or we would have had it collected by horse and cart back, however many years ago. But it really brought me, I couldn't, it was so away from what I'm used to at home that it just, it was pretty amazing. And, they were hand measuring out the milk, taking a temperature of the milk with not with a digital thermometer. It was all very much how it would have been back, 100 years ago.
So outside of Sri Lanka, Indonesia, what were some of the other insights that you had in organic farming? And did you see examples that made you question organic farming even more? And did you see examples of organic farming like, yes, this is the future?
That's interesting, Paul. I think America was the country that I wasn't it sounds like rude, but it wasn't the one I was most excited about, but it probably is one of the countries I got the most out of, because I thought it was going to be so similar to the UK, but it couldn't have been more different. And how organic looked over there was so different. And I had this sort of vision in my head what organic should look like. And that was totally blown apart in America, but in a positive way. So I had this big thing in my head around grazing cows. Organic cows should always be grazed. But if you go to America, I went there in August, and it was absolutely boiling hot. Well, it was a welfare issue to be grazing cows at that time, at that time of season. And also their ability to grow, be self-sufficient. In the UK, I think it's about 80% of our concentrate, so the feed that we feed our cows within the parlour is imported, whereas in America they have the climate to grow those crops themselves. So actually the self-sufficiency levels were way higher. It's the same in Denmark and Sweden. Self-sufficiency levels were way higher, and I think it just made me really think about what organic should look like, and it really should look very different depending on what country you're in. I don't think the same standards yes, we can learn from each other, but you wouldn't stand your child out in 35-degree heat. So why would you, it was a welfare thing to stand cows out in that kind of heat. And it really made me think when I came home, when we had hot periods of time, about, letting cows stand in if they wanted to before going out, all of the high hedges, all of those things that I probably hadn't really thought about as much. And I also saw the differences within, because your country is so big, actually some people had become organic because they were near a factory that were producing organic and been offered a very good price. So there was that distance thing very much came into it, whereas obviously in the UK we just don't really see that. Milk being trucked for miles. And then also the difference between, say, Organic Valley, the smaller producers that's supplying Organic Valley, up to the bigger ones in Horizon. So I think it looked very different depending on who you were supplying as well. The same core principles, but very different. I saw an amazing 3 times a day, and my friends couldn't. When I came home, just couldn't get their head around 3 times a day grass fed, and he was just Ed. Zimba, he was probably one of my best visits in America, and he showed me how large scale could be grass fed and still producing a good amount of feed and just very well run. He was, I had a whole day with him. He'd actually had a unannounced organic inspection. I think it's 5% of organic inspections are done unannounced in America. So he'd had like 24 hours notice. So he was like on the last day of this inspection. And I rang him just to say, are you sure that you're okay for me to come? He was like, yeah, absolutely. And I still came, and they were just finishing off, and he passed, it was all fine. But it was a large scale business, but they were still, had some of the best soils that I've seen, and the attention to detail, and just generally a very good business. Sadly, not got any not progression, next generation coming through, which was a worry. He was really keen to find the next person to take it on, because he built such an amazing machine there that he needed the next generation to come on. But just very well run, and just not something I would expect. Nearly 2,000 cows, grass fed 3 times a day, producing way more milk than our cows. Was not what I'd expect down the track that I went down.
So with those insights, how do you suggest to move forward with policies and regulations around organic in a way that makes that label mean something, but also takes into the context that you just brought up of understanding how it should be, or how it's most effectively produced in a specific geography?
I think, Paul, firstly, in the UK, we need to start with getting a label. So that's my big thing. We need a label, so an organic label. So most countries I went to, even Taiwan, had their own organic label. So that would cover everything from, vegetables through to milk to meat. Well, we don't have one of those labels in the UK. So that's a good starting point, I think, because I think it encourages, they say with milk, it's like the gateway to organic purchases, because it's not actually that an expensive swap. I think when I was in Taiwan, I was there for the Global Organic Conference. And that's sort of why I based the trip around that time. And it was the first time they'd really talked about grabbing hold of regenerative as part of organic. And we talked a lot about, we sort of had this thing called a fishbowl, where we all, were all within a room and discussing it, people from America through to Thailand, Australia, all in a room together, talking about, what it should look like going forward. And often it's IFOAM is the organisation that has this conference, and it's an international organisation, and often they sort of say what they think, and it then feeds through down into the different certification bodies within the countries. So it's quite important that they send the right message out. Anyway, we were talking about sort of how does regenerative fit with organic, and off the back of that they came out with not a white paper, but like a statement, how we should be embracing regenerative, and actually as organic we're already doing that, and it's the first time they've been vocal about that. And I think we sort of we needed to do something, because regenerative had become quite loud and quite very cool. They've done a very good you only have to look at the films like Kiss the Ground. It become quite exciting, and they got a real groundswell around it, and organic had just expected to be okay by staying the same. So we acknowledged that we need to learn lessons from the regenerative movement. And then the other things, I think that's in terms of policy, those two things. I think that we need to, if we're ever going to get the policy right, we need to reward the organic farmers or conventional that are doing some of the things for the environmental gains. So we need to see it as an environmental gain and incentivize that through subsidies and policy. And we did get a bit of that right within SFI, but that's just been shut and chucked out the window at the moment. So we'll see whether that comes back. But things like that do support people to go organic, and if that is part of hitting targets, then why should they not be rewarded for that?
Right.
And then in terms of like lessons learned in terms of for the actual farming practices and within bringing those home, my big thing that I'm sort of stuck on, I'm not stuck, but that I'm like really feeling about it at the moment, is that you need the right cow that can go out there and graze some pretty average grass. Sometimes, it's not always easy to get good quality organic feed in front of them, but then have the ability to be able to turn that switch if the feed price ratio's right. So organic feed, because we're importing quite a lot, it is very exposed to things like geopolitical circumstances. So we need to be able to turn the dial up, have a cow that has the capacity to be turned up if it's the right season, if that makes sense, if it adds up. It's very, that's similar to conventional, but it's more apparent within organic from looking at it more, if that makes sense. The distance between the two is often greater.
Between the cow that will produce on grass versus the cow that will produce on grass and ramping up.
Yeah, and also the difference between organic milk price and feed price. So, when I started this, it was 44p organic rolling, and then
for the milk price.
Milk price, and we were about £600 a ton for concentrate. So it was it's pretty extreme.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't worth feeding. If you even have to look at our just look at litres produced on farm, you can see that we've just turned it up the last year because we produced an extra sort of 400,000 litres because it made sense.
Because the feed cost was down.
Yeah, exactly. The feed cost was down, the milk price was up. So we just took advantage of that. And I don't know if you see this, I assume you see this as well within the big units in America, is that, it is a business.
Yeah.
These are businesses. We're very, yes, we're looking after animals, but these are businesses.
Right. And you've got to do what's best for the business and what makes the most financial sense, right?
Yeah, because that's part of sustainability, isn't it?
Exactly.
Huge part of sustainability. We're not going to be here tomorrow if we're not paying the bills.
Right. So in your 12 months of travel, have you ever had any doubts about organic?
Yes. Yes. I think I feel like everyone gets to this point where they're so bored of their topic that they think, I think I was in Taiwan like day one of the conference, and I just thought, I'm like the other side of the world, and I don't know if I want to hear the word organic again ever. And so I kind of I tried to shift it, because I'd been probably away for 3 weeks by that point. I was sort of in the middle of my travel then. And I had to try and shift what I was looking at, because otherwise I just would have disengaged, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so I just turned it in my head that I'm looking at how's your food produced, basically. So I sort of took some, I took a day of out a bit from it, and who knew that pineapples were grown in bushes on the ground? I thought they were grown in a tree. Do you know, things things that I would never have seen. I tried to make it way more broad, and the rest of my travel, apart from Indonesia, was very much just seeing countries, how they produce, how agriculture looks there. And because I think that really does help then to understand the difference between the conventional and organic. Mm. So I think, I found that I just got very bored of my topic by that period in my travel, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I think some of that was because it had turned itself around. within the UK as well. So I felt like it had naturally, like a lot of milk cycles, had turned them, we got short of milk, so the milk price went up. We're all part of this cycle. So I kind of, it was going better, if that makes sense,
right,
within the milk. But it did, something it has done, Paul, is made me realise in the bad times that we need to have some sort of collaboration between all of these sectors involved. So we've started something called the Organic Roundtable, which was started by our feed rep, Rob, who brings a lot of, sells a lot of organic grain and things. And it's the first time that a lot of these organisations have sat in a room together. So we've got the main organic milk buyers. Obviously, you have to be careful with competition law. We don't talk about pricing and things as such. And then feed about 3 or 4 feed merchants, and then we've got both certification bodies, which you either normally one or the other. They're they don't tend to, they have the same standards, but you're either OF&G or your soil association. So this has been really positive. And then we've brought guests in like DEFRA, which is our government agency that deal with the agriculture, and NFU, our National Farmers Union. We've had AHDB, which is our levy, but also just trying to have some sort of collaboration. So when we do have a downturn to get again, which it will happen when, oversupply and things, then we can work together. Because, there's certain things that we've just come out of EU and we have got a chance now to make changes to our organic standards and things. So we're way more in control. So maybe let's do that as a group rather than this organisation wants that, they push for that, and it doesn't happen.
right.
Whereas collectively our slogan thing is partnering for progress.
Right.
So that's been really exciting. I think that's been and I'm chairing that group. So it's been a really positive thing to come out of Nuffield, is to get, to help set that up.
That's a great example of some of the things that come out of Nuffield. And going back to what you were saying about getting bored with your topic, I think one thing I've learned about being in Nuffield and talking to a lot of other scholars is you spend all this time studying your topic, like you said. And I think everybody that's in it gets to a point, and I think they probably the leaders in Nuffield probably want us to get to this point, and this is probably one of the aspects of it is you just go beyond your topic, and you just kind of transition your mind to just be curious about everything you see. And I do it now as even when I'm around home, like just being curious about, my friend's business down the road. How does he operate his business? What are his systems that he operates by? What are his challenges? And you just morph into somebody that's curious about every aspect of the world around you. And I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways that I've gotten over this last 12 months is, yes, I researched this topic for a long time all over the world, but you morph into a point where everything you experience, you question with a curious mind to learn more.
I think that's totally right, Paul. And I think that's like the most exciting part of it, is that it just you grow so much. So one of the things they said to us, you need to get comfortable at being uncomfortable. And that's when we first started. And I think it's that human element in it, that it is going to be pretty tough. And I think you find people, it's an amazing opportunity, don't get me wrong. And I'm sure you feel the same, but there's times when you're going to be feeling way out of your comfort zone. But I feel like that's really where the growth happens.
Yep.
And, we've had people in our year group, new jobs, buy farms. Rachel, it was amazing. Rachel, we had a talk. I didn't actually manage to go to that talk in Brazil, but they came, Sally's husband, do you remember, came Simon. And spoke about how Simon, about the dairy farms that he'd set up in Brazil. And Rachel in our year group, who has the goats, she listened to that and she rang her husband afterwards and said, why aren't we buying a farm? And they've just bought a farm.
That's
and
awesome.
It's just things like that. It's amazing, isn't it, Paul? And it's just surrounding yourself with people, like positive people, really makes a difference. And I think you just make life friends. You know, some of my best friends have now come from Nuffield, and people I kind of knew before, but, you know, like Laura, I knew her because she works for the levy board. But I didn't know her that well. But now, you know, I would speak to her most weeks. You know, it's a shared experience. And I think it's such an opportunity. But there are times when you think, oh, goodness, what am I doing? And it's really tough for the people at home as well. Because I think we don't talk about that enough, that it is really tough for those at home who are enabling us to do this.
Right.
Whether that's your team members on the farm, or whether that's your spouse and your children, or, you know, whatever your setup is.
Yep.
It's not easy, because you do come out a different person.
Yeah. I compare it to growing 10 years in a year.
Yeah, that's so true. It is so true, isn't it? And I think I don't think people keep saying about, oh, have you written your report, or have you started that? And I'm just not worried. Like, it was so much about the experience.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know how many people read the reports. My husband does read actually quite a lot of reports, but I think the biggest part of it is the experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And the people that you meet along the way, as you said earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So speaking of that, do you mind giving us a couple of examples? I know you mentioned you saw a lot of different examples of resiliency as you've been traveling. You mind giving us a couple of examples that you saw firsthand?
Probably the first one was within Sri Lanka. There was a couple of girls so all my visits from Sri Lanka were set up by someone I met on LinkedIn. Very random. He'd worked for a dairy called Plethwaite Dairies, which are sort of the biggest processing, and they process milk into powder in Sri Lanka. And he set up some amazing visits for me. And there were these two girls who I met. You know, I stayed at this B&B, and then I had to get a bus, which was sort of like, I think it was 5p for like a half an hour bus journey. You know, the financial position there is very different to within the UK and America. And I met these two girls. I was to meet them at the bus station. It was bustling, this bus station. And one of them worked within the chicken sector, within the poultry sector, as sort of a knowledge exchange woman. And then the other one was within the dairy sector. And they took me round tea plantations and two dairies, but the passion that they had for what they did, and they weren't from farming backgrounds. They'd gone to university and learned about animal health. But the girl who was doing the dairy had set up her own sort of Facebook page to help local dairy farmers.
Okay.
On, you know, so she'd share posts on, you know, mastitis, or you know, cell count, or, you know, carving a cow. And she was doing that independently because she was determined to make a difference. And that's where I saw like real, like over the top resilience it was not an easy environment for people to continue dairy. You know, there wasn't a lot of support for dairying there as such. So she was amazing. And then I suppose Peder, number two, would probably have been Peder, the CEO of Arla. And I think because he has seen us through Brexit, he's seen us through Ukraine, he's seen us through high inflations over periods of time, and steered that ship to, you know, it's one of the most successful dairy co-ops in the world. And overnight, suddenly that Brexit was happening. You know, he has had the ability to adapt over time. And I think he's given he never planned to go into the dairy sector. He's a marketeer by trade. He spent time in the Middle East. He was there in the Middle East when the Gulf War was happening, and every other company was getting out, and he was there saying, no, we need to stay, because if we lose our hold here now. And actually that's been exceptionally good for Arla, having a Middle East influence. And I think he's weathered every single storm with grace. It's not He's not a showy person, very reserved, but he's been exceptional for our business. And I think, and that's actually one of the reasons I wanted to join the Board of Representatives, was to learn, to hear him talk and learn from him. And probably thirdly, I think, not Pacific person, but seeing how other people like how they, so I feel like our climate is exceptional for growing grass, grazing cows, but seeing other people resilience to drought, to snow, to everything that we take for granted. If I'm never going to say we've had a drought again, I think, Paul, I just think, I look at, and if it's not rained for, 10 days, I'm saying there's a drought, but it realistically in Australia, it's pretty brown. Yep. There's not really anything to eat. It's designed, people sell cattle. It's very, I think it was in 1976 here, it was really bad. But we've had one other time, I think 2018 was pretty bad as well. But really, that's what they have every year there. Right. And I know they get used to that, and their animals, they're breeding animals, but actually with the resilience in being able to farm with an extreme landscape is it really took me aback.
Yeah, it's amazing. I saw that as well firsthand about a month ago when I was there, and they were saying it was really green and lush, and I was looking around thinking, we would probably call this a drought at home.
Yeah, I know. It's bonkers, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is.
But yeah, it just goes to show people can adapt and they can figure out ways to manage around very difficult situations over time.
Yeah. And I think, Paul, also, I haven't really mentioned them, but I became very obsessed with them. I'm not sure that's the right word to use, but the Amish community, their ability to keep to their beliefs within such an evolving environment, just, it really got to me, as in it was actually really inspiring that they were able to continue with how they believed things should be, where the rest of the world has exploded with tech and all of those things, but actually very profitable farms and very, doing a very good job.
Yep.
And that just, I went to quite a few Amish communities, and they were very kind to have me, and I was blown away by their kindness and their openness, actually, which I didn't expect. So I think that's one thing also Nuffield does for you, is you drop all those preconceived ideas.
Yep, you have to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Sophie, thanks so much for being on the podcast again. And
thanks for having me.
It's been great to follow your journey over the last year and be a small part of it, seeing you in Brazil, having you at our farm, being able to be at your farm for a few days and meet your family. It was a great experience. So really appreciate it, and appreciate you sharing your story.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, Paul. It's been great.
Awesome. Thanks, Sophie.
Well, thanks once again for listening to another episode of the AgCulture Podcast with Sophie Gregory from the UK, dairy farmer extraordinaire. Reach out to her. She's got her information on our show notes for you to be able to get in contact with her. Loves to help people. Very great speaker. So I encourage you, reach out and get to know her and connect with her. As always, if you found this episode interesting, please share it with somebody you know. That is how we grow our audience. So until next week, I'm Paul Windemuller, and this has been the AgCulture Podcast.